Venerable Damchu has asked me to give a talk on the bhikshuni issue, and she told me that the people whom I'm speaking to are mostly familiar with Lamrim. So I think this gave me a good opportunity how to start with my small lecture. I mean, in the Lamrim, you will know that there is this section on the precious human rebirth, explaining the 8 freedoms and the 10 conducive conditions for somebody to make really use of one's life as a human being, in the sense of using the human rebirth for enlightenment, to going to enlightenment, right? And to make your whole life practice of Dharma, and really make all the actions you do all the day into Dharma practice. So actually the first freedom among the 8 freedoms explains that you should be free from rebirth in a place where you don't have the 4 communities. So what are the 4 communities? You will know these are the lay women and the laymen and the nuns and the monks, right? So you have these 4 communities, and these were the 4 communities the Buddha himself started 2,500 years ago when he was living in India. So there's a lot of debate whether the Buddha has been a social reformer or not, and I don't want to go into this, but I mean, a fact is that the Buddha himself, he didn't accept the caste system that was the custom at that time in India, but he said people from all walks of life can become part of his community or part of these 4 communities, and that it is important. I mean, you can only consider a country or a place to be a place where the Dharma is growing and where the conditions are met to practice Dharma if all the 4 communities are present. So this is basic teaching in all the Buddhist traditions. And so now, I mean, speaking from the Tibetan Buddhist point of view, I mean, you will find these 4 communities actually in Tibetan societies. You will see there are monks, there are nuns, there are lay people, men and women. So it seems like all the 4 communities are there. But strictly speaking, according to the Vinaya, the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya as it is practiced in the Tibetan tradition, actually nuns means they have to be bhikshunis. And monks means they have to be bhikshus. So means they have to have full ordination, bhikshu ordination or bhikshuni ordination. So, and the nuns in the Tibetan society, they don't have this bhikshuni precepts. It's different from the lifetime of the Buddha. So maybe to understand the whole issue of bhikshuni ordination, I have to mention that at the time of the Buddha, there had been only one Vinaya teaching, means a teaching on how to discipline oneself. And for the 3 higher trainings, means for moral discipline, for concentration, and for wisdom, to develop all of this, the basic is really, the basis is that you practice ethics and moral discipline. I mean, you know from your own experience how difficult it is if you want to develop really strong concentration in your meditation, and you want to go into a meditation on emptiness, for example. It's very important that first you have stabilized your daily practice, right? I mean, if your mind is attracted all the time to different objects and you can't discipline yourself, like going up at the right time in the morning and going early enough to bed in the evening, then, I mean, how will you manage to develop shamatha and vipassana? So So I mean, a good discipline is very important for practitioners, and so I mean, the teaching of discipline is very important. And at the time of the Buddha, when he was explaining how to discipline one's own mind and how to discipline one's language and one's physical acts, then there was only this one teaching by the Buddha. But then when the Buddha had passed away into the nirvana at the age of 80 years, then the first summer after his passing away, usually there's the monsoon time in India, so he was they had this custom of coming together for 3 months for the rainy season retreat. And so we speak in Buddhism about 3 councils that took place, means his main disciples came together for some meetings. And during the first council, after the passing away of the Buddha, his main disciples were reciting the Vinaya and the Sutra and the Abhidharma, so the Tripitaka, the canonical text of Buddhists. So at that time it was fixed what the Buddha had taught, how to practice discipline. This is at least what all the Buddhists believe. And then about 2nd century, almost 700 years later in India, at that time the Buddha had passed away a long time ago, and it had Buddhism had developed about 18 early Buddhist schools. I don't go into the history of all of this, but there were different Vinayas at that time, not 18 different Vinayas, but some different Vinayas. And nowadays we have only 3 Vinaya traditions left. So the one is Tibetan Buddhism, has the Mula Savastivada Vinaya. Then in East Asia they have the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya, and in Theravada countries they have the Pali Vinaya. So I mean, this is important to understand that we have nowadays 3 mainstream traditions of Buddhism, namely Tibetan Buddhism, East Asian Buddhism, and Theravada Buddhism. And all of these 3 traditions go together with the Vinaya teaching, but they have different versions of the Vinaya. Yeah. So, I mean, and only the Dhammagupta school in East Asia has still bhikshunis. In the Theravada tradition, at the time it was about 3rd century before Christian era. So then there was the famous Emperor Ashoka, and he had a son and a daughter, Mahinda and Sanghamitra, and they went to Sri Lanka and started a bhikshu and a bhikshuni sangha in Sri Lanka. So then in Sri Lanka we had the bhikkhuni sangha up to about 12th century. But it is recorded that in the year 433 a bhikshuni sangha with the help from the nuns from Sri Lanka was founded in China, in Nanking. This was actually not the first bhikshunis they had in China. In the year 357, the first Chinese bhikshuni got ordained by bhikshus alone. And then later they had relationships between Sri Lanka and China, a lot of merchants going back and forth, and they also brought scriptures on Buddhism and delegations of practitioners. And so they brought with the ship nuns from Sri Lanka, and they questioned how these bhikshunis in China had become bhikshunis and whether they were properly ordained or not. And then some nuns got doubt whether they were properly ordained or not. So they asked their teachers, and the teachers said, yes, you are properly ordained, but if you have any doubt, we can have again ordination ceremony together with the bhikshunis from Sri Lanka, having the monks and nuns performing together the legal act to become a bhikshuni, and then this will be also fine, but the ordination by the monks only is not invalid. That's also fine, so you can choose. So the nuns decided they would prefer to have it exactly as it is explained in the Vinaya, having the full ordination as nuns by the bhikshus and bhikshunis, by both. So they had the ceremony, and then from 433 onwards, they had bhikshunis in China, and from there Buddhism got also spread to Korea and to Vietnam. So all over East Asia, they are all practicing according to the Dharmagupta Vinaya, to make it short. I mean, I don't want to go into all these details. So then much later, in the 8th century, Buddhism spread also to Tibet. And it was the Bengal master Shantarakshita who brought the practice of Vinaya to Tibet. And then in the year 763, the first ordination took place in Samye. Maybe those of you who have been to Tibet will know that it's a famous and the first monastery in Tibet, this place, Samye. And the history books seem to report only on the first 7 Tibetan men who became ordained as bhikshus by Shantarakshita and a group of monks. And usually His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said several times that unfortunately Shantarakshita did not bring bhikshunis. We don't know why he didn't bring, because we know from stone inscriptions at that time still there had been nuns in India and also Nepal. So nuns were still there, but they didn't bring the nuns. So, I mean, nowadays, actually, I mean, as a researcher, I have to say, we are getting so many old manuscripts, you know. Many, I mean, books we thought that have been lost. And so it's possible that we will learn slowly that there have been nuns in the 8th century or later, you know. So, but at the moment we don't have any records for the time of Shantarakshita, and it even doesn't say the records I have seen. They don't mention about nuns' ordination at all. They also don't mention about Shramanerikas who became ordained. I think the first account I saw in the Blue Annals was around the year 1000. So quite late. So, but we get more and more research, more and more books. Texts are entered into the computer with searching tools, you know. So, I mean, it can change very quickly, our knowledge about this old time. But this is the present status. But however, I mean, I have seen myself some Tibetan books who mention bhikshunis. Even Shantarakshita didn't bring bhikshunis. In the history of Tibet, we do have reports on bhikshunis who were living in Tibet. So where did these nuns come from, if it wasn't brought from India? So we have accounts that they were ordained by bhikshus alone, you know. So we have to note at the beginning, at the lifetime of the Buddha, for sure the first nuns were ordained by monks, by the Buddha himself and also by the monks. And then, because there was no bhikshuni sangha in the beginning, so then also in China, when they started first with the bhikshus alone. Then when later they changed, and the nuns came with the boat from Sri Lanka, and then they had this ordination by the bhikshus and bhikshunis together. And I mean, it was only in Sri Lanka at this very early time, 3rd century BC, when Mahinda said he cannot give as a monk, he cannot give the bhikshuni ordination, and his sister should come Sanghamitra and do it together with him. And then, you know, she brought this little part from the Bodhi tree she took on the boat, and then they planted the Bodhi tree in Sri Lanka. And nowadays, if you go to Sri Lanka, you will have the impression that the Buddha got enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, not in India but in Sri Lanka. I think many people, the pilgrims there, they really believe that the Buddha was not from India but was from Sri Lanka, and he attained enlightenment in Sri Lanka. And they have this wall painting with Sanghamitra coming with the boat, bringing the little Bodhi tree, you know. So it's a big story, and the people have a lot of veneration for the Bhikkhuni Sangha because it was so famous. You know, for 1500 years they had a living Bhikkhuni Sangha with writing beautiful verses, having attained high realizations. So, I mean, the people in Sri Lanka really admire. And but in Tibet we didn't have, but there were some princes, I mean, between the 12th and 15th century we have accounts of bhikshunis. And you will also, maybe you have heard also about the famous bhikshuni, the Gelongma Palmo, the nun Palmo, yeah, who is related to the Avalokiteshvara practice and who introduced the Nyungne practice. Yeah. So this fasting ritual for related to Avalokiteshvara, this is very famous in the Tibetan tradition, and you will see in the Nyungne practice there is one beautiful verse. I don't know whether you have done Nyungne ritual, but there's the Potu, special verse when you make prostrations, and then you visualize that Gelongma Palmo is on the top of your crown, you know, when you do the prostrations, you know. So it means every monk, every lay person, every lay woman, every nun, everybody is visualizing Gelongma Palmo, you know, to be at the crown of one's head, you know. So she is highly venerated, and there are also stories that by miracle powers she came from India and put her food on the on Tibetan soil, so that she has really been there, you know. And so it's very difficult to say nowadays whether she has really been in Tibet or whether just by miracle powers. But you will find around the caves of Milarepa in the far west of Tibet, where many people got enlightened, and where Milarepa meditated in the caves, yeah, the famous Milarepa cave. Around these places there were many caves and many people who attained high realization in their meditation in those places, and we have records of nuns in those places also, you know. So I mean, I heard also from nuns in Korea who told me they had so great meditators, nuns meditating in Korea. They never care about writing history books and biographies and so on. They were just interested in practice. So if we don't have written records about nuns in our history books, this doesn't mean that they didn't exist. We really don't know, you know. But I mean, I myself, for example, worked for some years on the texts of Jetsun Rendava, and I found in his collected works mentioning of 2 letters by 2 bhikshunis, you know. So, I mean, he had correspondence with 2 bhikshunis. Unfortunately, I mean, I haven't seen these 2 letters yet, but they are in the in the index of his collected works. So they really existed at his time, and he was living from 1348 to 1412, you know, so about 14th century. And then we have also this famous Budong Chokle Namgyel, who ordained the Samling Dorje Pakmo, the highest female reincarnation they had in Tibet. And she was a princess. She was ordained by bhikshus, clear records given in her biography, translated by Hildegard Dienberger into English, so you can study the biography. And then we also have the accounts of Shakya Chokden in his biography, who was also living around that time, 15th century. So he was ordaining his mother and others to become bhikshunis, and I think also the 8th Karmapa in his collected works. I haven't seen myself yet, but I heard that he has even composed a manual or ordination manual for bhikshuni ordination. So for sure, if he composed this manual, means there must have been a usage of it, right? You don't compose a manual just to be in your collected works, but there must have been a concrete case that he gave ordination to nuns, and for this he needed this ordination manual, and so he composed it himself. So we had bhikshunis in Tibet, but it seems that as far as we know so far, all of them had been ordained by monks only, and this was a controversial issue whether their ordination was conducted proper or not. So now we have to see on the one side, those who gave this bhikshuni ordination were extremely famous Vinaya scholars, right? They were not just some stupid monks doing something, but they were acknowledged very, very well Vinaya scholars. And then there are other very well Vinaya scholars who criticized them. So my teacher used to say, if scholars agree, they are no real scholars. And if yogis disagree, they are not really yogis, you know. So, I mean, it's the nature of scholars, as we know, to disagree, right? So there was, controversial. It was controversial whether this was okay or not. So, I mean, to better understand, you have to, I just want to briefly mention, I'm working on a text from the Mula Savastivada Vinaya, in one volume. It's on different matters, and in this volume we have something called bhikshuni karma vachana. Means it's ordination manual for bhikshuni ordination. It's an ordination manual for bhikshunis, right? So when you look into this text, it's describing how women should get ordained. So, but it starts first with a story. The story is about Mahaprajapati, the first nun recorded to be ordained by the Buddha. And she was ordained just by accepting the so-called 8 Guru Dhammas, 8 rules for the nuns. And they were subordinating the nuns to the monks. Means the monks were superior, and the nuns had to show respect to them. So the Buddha is recorded to have said, if the nuns accept these 8 rules, then this will be their ordination. So, I mean, I can't tell you now the whole story because we don't have so much time. You will have the chance at a different time, and Venerable Damcho can also tell you the whole story. But she's a very good storyteller, you will know. So anyway, this was the first ordination. Then, you know, this is a conversation, I mean, you will have heard about it. Mahaprajapati approaches the Buddha, she was his stepmother, and asked him for ordination, and the Buddha first said, no, you just remain as a lay person, and then she asked a second and a third time, and the Buddha didn't agree, and then she was staying outside monastery and she was crying, and then Ananda passed by, one of the main disciples of the Buddha, and asked her, why are you crying? And she said, well, the Buddha didn't want to give me ordination. And then Ananda said, well, you stay here, and I talked to the Buddha. And then he went there and he asked the Buddha whether the women can attain enlightenment or not. And the Buddha said, yes, they can attain enlightenment. And then he said, so then why they shouldn't go also for full ordination? And then the Buddha finally gave in and said, it's okay, if they accept these 8 principal guidelines, these 8 Guru Dhammas, then they can become ordained. So we can speculate a lot why the Buddha had some doubt, but it's very obvious at that time. I mean, they were mendicants. They were just living by alms, going around, I mean, begging for their food, sleeping under the trees, meditating under the trees. And his stepmother was used to a life in a palace, and a woman, and so quite vulnerable, and he felt a lot of compassion for her. So maybe for him it was difficult to think that she will just wander around like a beggar, you know, and that will become too difficult for these 500 Shakya women and Mahaprajapati herself to live like this. So I have to watch the clock. So then, then later, I mean, the rituals, how to become a nun, all became more and more complicated, and so it was explained that you have to have different steps how to become a nun. So the ritual, the manual explains that first you take refuge, and then you become a lay woman, take the 5 lay precepts, and then the next step is that you become rabjung. You take pravraja, means going forth, means you leave the household life and you get your head shaved, and you give up the signs of a householder and you take on the signs of a monastic. And then the next step will be that you receive the Shamaniaca Precepts, the 10 precepts. Usually it's explained not 36 but 10 precepts, and then the 10 precepts you can see that if you divide them further, then you can divide them into 36. So this is what the most Tibetan nuns are nowadays practicing. But this is usually in our literature, we translate this usually as novice nuns, So it means this is actually the first step you take, and then this was not existing in the very beginning. It seems that in the very beginning you had pravaja, the going forth, and then immediately the upasampada, the higher ordination. And in the early text we don't have any mention about shramanirika or shikshamana ordination. So, I mean, these first steps, taking refuge, taking lay precepts, taking the 10 precepts, is all the same for men and women, no difference. And then the monks usually take, after the Shramanera ordination, after the novice ordination, they take full ordination and take 253 precepts. And the women is a little bit more difficult. They, after Shramanirika ordination, they have some extra step called shikshamana for 2 years training period, where they get some additional 6 main and 6 secondary rules. And then, after 2 years, if they could manage, then they take the full ordination, and it means bhikshuni ordination. And then they have to keep, according to the Mula Savastivada Vinaya, 364 rules. So you may think this is unfair. Why the nuns have 100 rules more? But, I mean, usually our belief is in Tibetan Buddhism that the more precepts you keep properly with a good attitude, the more merits you gain, right? So then nuns gain more merit than monks? What do you think? 100 precepts more. Well, if you go to a debating court, Tibetans like philosophical debate, right? So they also debate Vinaya issues. And when you listen to the reasoning they give on the debating court, when they ask, do the nuns get more merit than the nuns? Do the nuns get more merit than the monks? They would say, no. The nuns, the women have more desire. They have more attachment. And therefore they need stronger remedy, more antidotes. So they need stronger medicine, so they get more precepts, right? So, I don't know. I usually believe in gender equity. So I say, well, in the Vinaya we have a story where Utpali approaches the Buddha and asks, what should we do if somebody suddenly changes sex? A man becomes a woman, or other way around, a woman becomes a man. And this person is ordained as a monk or nun. So what shall we do? Is the ordination of that person still valid, or do we need to reordain the person? And the Buddha said, no need to reordain. The monk, if he becomes a woman, has to shift into the nun's order, and the nun who became a man has to shift into the monk's order, and then they just keep the rules of the respective order. So what does this mean? this means that in nature there is no difference between bhikshu and bhikshuni. The only difference is whether they say in Tibetan, the 10, the basis, I mean the body, is a male body or a female body, right? So, and depending on which sex you have a certain number of rules to keep, but in nature, the vow you take is the same nature. So means equal merit, right? Doesn't matter. And I mean, as a historian, I would say, I mean, the Buddha was asked after the nuns became ordained what discipline the nuns should keep, and the Buddha said just the same as the monks. So in the beginning they had the same rules to keep as the monks, but then, I mean, this is what sometimes my teacher was joking. He said, if you look into the Vinaya, there are 6 naughty monks who do everything wrong, and then because of their wrongdoings, many new rules were set up. You know, you have always a case. Somebody did something naughty, then somebody goes to the Buddha and complains and says, well, you know, this and this person has done this and this thing. Is this really in accord with the Buddha Dharma? And the Buddha said, oh, is this really true? Call that person. And then the person comes and he asks, this and this person said you have done this and this wrong. Is this true? And then the person says, yes, this is true. And then the Buddha said, oh, you shouldn't do this, you know, because this has this and this results, or it has this and this disadvantages from the point of Dharma, so you should really not do this. So from now on, if you do this and this thing, this is a mistake, and you have to purify in this and this way, you know. So then there were these 6 naughty monks doing all the time things wrong, so many new rules had to be set up, but there were 12 naughty nuns, you know. So since 12 naughty nuns are doing more mistakes than 6 naughty monks, you know, so you have more rules for the nuns. This is also one version of the story, so I'm sure you will find more versions of the story, how it came into being. But if you look into the precepts, the nuns have additional precepts comparing to the monks. You will notice that these many extra rules are mainly related to women's not using cosmetics, and how they go bathing, you know, that they should have some extra robe for taking a bath, and they shouldn't go naked into the river, you know, to take a bath, but need a bathrobe and things like this, you know. So you will find it's something about menstruation, how they should deal with it in this situation. So very practical things, you know. You can understand easily that this didn't happen before with the monks, but there are also some extra rules for the monks which the nuns don't have. For example, that monks shouldn't build too large houses, and they shouldn't spend too much time on building houses, and so on, you know. And then even the Buddha asked the monks, if the nuns lose during the rainy season their houses, then monks are allowed to build houses for the nuns, you know. So, and then he is also forbidding the monks to accept alms from the nuns. So the nuns shouldn't continue to serve the monks like they were their husbands, you know. So many kind of these rules, you know. So interesting to study, actually. Gives you some idea of practical lifestyle as a nun. So now Venerable Damche said that I should briefly speak, let me see the watch, 10 minutes left, about why we don't have the bhikshuni ordination now, what would be needed to establish it, and the Tibetan way of thinking of it. So for this first one, why we don't have the nuns, I mean, I have mentioned before the different steps from taking refuge until full ordination. So the problem is that for all these steps, it says in the Vinaya that all these refuge, upasika precepts, means the lay precepts, the novice vows, etc., all the steps, these vows should be given by bhikshunis. So you either become part of the female community or the male community. This has something to do with the social structure of society at the time of the Buddha, right? So women stay together with the women, men stay together with the men. They all keep celibacy, so obviously if you mix them up, this would give a lot of problems, or may give a lot of problems. Yeah. So the nuns were asked to take responsibility. So you need actually for all the precepts nuns, but for the lay precepts, as you know, and also novice, and you have also monks nowadays in the Tibetan tradition doing this. But monks usually don't become shikshamana. They don't have these 2 extra years. And as I mentioned before, the bhikshunis have more precepts than them, right? So somehow the monks feel they are not authorized to give the bhikshuni ordination and the shikshamana ordination and the bhikshuni ordination. The shikshamana should be given by the bhikshunis, and for the bhikshuni it says you need to take in front of the twofold sangha, means a sangha of 10 bhikshus and 12 bhikshunis. So then you need the 12 bhikshunis to do all this extra work for women's ordination, and we don't have these bhikshunis, you know. So the monks are not sure whether they are allowed to do this or not to do this. So this is, I mean, actually why we don't have them. They say, well, we don't have the bhikshunis, so how can we do this ordination ceremony as it is prescribed in the Vinaya without having the bhikshunis? So then when the Tibetans escaped to India, then they learned that there are bhikshunis in the East Asian traditions. So then the question came up, can't we ask these Chinese or Korean or Vietnamese bhikshunis to come and help and give the ordination? And then they were not sure, because they are following a little different Vinaya, whether it's okay to do ordination with 2 different Vinaya communities, you know. So this is how we got stuck, and a lot of research was done. And so then we had, I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama told myself in 1982 that they are doing a lot of research and I should wait some time. And then, I mean, after some years, he said in 85, for you now it's okay to go to Taiwan and take the ordination there. But I mean, in between, many committees were set up. You know, this was more for private decision. For private decision, I mean, to become a bhikshuni means you renounce, you know, and you really want to attain enlightenment, right? So this is a personal decision you take by your own. You say, I really have this wish to get out of samsara, and I want to take the best means. And in the Lamrim it's explained you get the most merit if you keep the precepts of a fully ordained person. So I really want to become a fully ordained nun or a fully ordained monk, and I take these precepts and I take it. But to establish it in a tradition after so many centuries of not having it is a different step, right? So you have to distinguish between a private decision and a decision for the whole Buddhist community. So Tibetan way of thinking of it, I mean, who is surprised is different. I mean, there is not one Tibetan way of thinking, right? Every Tibetan, like every other person in this world, has his own views. And everybody has a different view on this. So I can't say what every Tibetan thinks about it. But I know there are many Tibetans who are in favor and others who are quite against it. And then a large group who doesn't say anything. So you don't know whether they're in favor or not in favor. And maybe they are not interested, or maybe they don't want to say something because they don't know where the mainstream is going. So many people just like to follow wherever the majority is going, right? And waiting for how the majority decides. So personally, I think what is really needed is, on the one side, I think it's important for the women themselves to practice Dharma, and when it comes to the point that they feel they really want to take the full ordination, they have to express it to their teachers. It's very important to not just wait that the Lama will come and tell you, oh, you should become a bhikshuni. This is not the way how Dharma works. I mean, I know from many Tibetan Lamas who say, if you want to become a teacher or you want to do a certain practice, you have to ask the teacher. The teachers usually don't give anything to the students they don't ask for, you know. So I mean, it really has to come from the side of the practitioners, that they have to approach their teachers and express their wishes, and they should be serious if they express it, not for just because they like gender equity or something like this, you know. But I mean, I'm in favor of gender equity, but I mean, this shouldn't be the main motivation why you want to become fully ordained. But to become fully ordained, your wish should be really you want to collect a lot of merit and make use of your precious human rebirth and to attain enlightenment quickly, right? And if you really feel that you are able to keep the precepts, then this would be a very good mean to do it. And on the other side, I mean, on a personal level, you can always do it, but perhaps not in the tradition, the monks of your tradition are practicing. Then you need to go like myself to Taiwan or Hong Kong, or Vietnamese tradition or Korean tradition and take the precepts there. Or you have to push your teachers to please, because you can die every moment, right? We know from contemplating about death and impermanence. I mean, this was when I had decided I want to become a nun. I really didn't want to wait, you know. I thought suddenly I can die every moment. And then what if I die and I don't have taken the precepts? This would be so sad after I have made the decision. So I became ordained 10 days after I had made the decision. I was pushing my teacher. I was saying again and again, you know, but what if I'm going to die? And he said, oh, what about the permission from your parents? Did you get it? I said, I can tell them later. And he said, no. In the ordination, you will be asked, did your parents give the permission? So you have to make sure your parents have agreed. Then you come back afterwards, you know. So I was only 22 at that time, you know. So so I had really to struggle, but I made it, and I still am after more than 30 years now, I think. I think it was the right decision. But I mean, you need to be determined. But then to establish bhikshuni ordination within the Tibetan tradition, I'm afraid to say it somehow needs a political will on the side of the most monks, the leading lamas. They really have to understand how important it is for all of us that we have it, and then we need their support to give it. And there are many lamas who have given letters of support. Actually, all the heads of the different traditions have given support letters. You can find them in the internet. So, but on the, basis, still there's some resistance. So we have to work, grassroots work. We have to discuss whenever we get the chance with the teachers and with the common people, and explain to them why it's so important. So I think that's what is needed. And then there will be two different ways how to do it. Either, I have written an article together with a Theravada monk, Bhikkhu Analayu, which has been published in the Journal of Buddhist Ethics. You can download easy from the internet. And there I have shown that there is canonical evidence that monks under certain circumstances can give all the steps of ordination. And I have given, the proofs from the scriptures that actually we do have this permission in the scriptures, that if there is no bhikshuni sangha, the bhikshus can do it on their own. And then there's another approach, as I mentioned before, to do it together with the bhikshunis of the Dharmagupta tradition. This would kind of be a kind of ecumenical ordination, right? That you just do it together. But since the monks are superior, if the monks are from the Mula Sarvastivada tradition, the precepts will be Mula Sarvastivada ordination. Then the advantage would be that the nuns have really, whether ordained by bhikshus alone or together with the Dharmagupta bhikshunis, they would really have the same Vinaya practice than the monks in their tradition. And I think this is for the future of the four communities really important that we do have this. And so I think if you understood my starting point with the precious human rebirth and the first freedom that I mean, if you want to establish Buddha Dharma in your country, then it's important to have right from the beginning the 4 communities, including the bhikshunis. This is what the Buddha himself taught, what you find in the Lamrim text also. So it's important to point out to our Tibetan teachers that we want to establish all the 4 communities right from the beginning in our country. So we really need their support for this, you know. And then it will be really a country where you can use your human rebirth, give very meaningful, you know, you can make your life meaningful. So I hope all of you will be able to make your life meaningful. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.